Hello, Western Pennsylvania Township Commissioners. Thank you for inviting me to speak at your 2021 annual conference. I spoke to this group on September 26th, 2015. And at that time, I advocated live streaming your meetings and posting a recording of the meeting on YouTube. That was 6 years ago. And it's safe to say that a few things have changed in our world since then. For example, we used to meet at Seven Springs, and now we're meeting here in Erie. I've grown a beard. Oh, and we've slogged through a pandemic that changed pretty much everything about the way we work together, interact with each other, and govern. So what I want to do today is revisit this topic. I'm still going to take the position that you should be live streaming your meetings and posting a recording of the meeting on YouTube. But I'm also going to offer some suggestions for why you're not doing that. I'm going to tell you some stories about some things I've seen during the pandemic. And I'm going to talk frankly about how you can provide a local government service for your residents that exceeds their expectations. This is Act 15, Take 2, Revisiting Remote Meetings Following the Pandemic. Okay, but let's start before the pandemic. Let me tell you where Aleppo Township was just before the stay-at-home orders went into place. When I spoke with you in 2015, Aleppo Township had really just begun the process of streaming, recording, and posting its meetings. In fact, we discovered one of the keys to making the process work in the Bavarian Lounge while we were chatting after my speech. I like to say that the speech itself and the conversation that followed were a critical part of the development process. But by 2020, the process was on autopilot, and I had nothing to do with it. In fact, I had sold my house, I had moved out of the jurisdiction, and I had resigned my position as a commissioner. I wasn't involved in the streaming, recording, or posting of the meetings at all. We had located a tech guy who came into all the meetings and took care of all the button pushing so that the other commissioners and the township manager didn't have to worry about those details. And we had trained the township secretary on the process of posting the videos to YouTube. And we had built a library of 129 videos of our meetings. That was before the pandemic. Aleppo Township already had 129 videos of our meetings posted before America even heard the phrase social distancing. And those videos were indexed and searchable. And let me explain to you exactly how that worked. Aleppo Township residents got an email following all the meetings that broke the meetings into their individual component parts. So there's a bullet list that says things like, we talked about repaving roads, or we talked about police services. But after each one of the bullets, there is a link that says, click here to access this part of the meeting. And that is a pinpoint link that takes the resident exactly to that part of the recording. The theory being that the same residents that won't show up for a 1-hour meeting in person probably won't watch a 1-hour meeting of a recording online. And the idea is that if we can make it so that they can just click on one of these links, they will be more involved. And it worked. But what was even better was that once we realized we were creating these digests, we could just post them to the website and they became searchable. So now somebody that comes to the Aleppo Township website, even if they don't get these digests, if they don't know anything about these digests, if they search for a term in the Aleppo Township search box, it's going to include these digests in their search process. So they might get, when they go there, a link to exactly a pinpoint part of a meeting where they're talking about exactly what they're asking about. And again, for any of you who are sitting there saying, yeah, but we could never do anything like this in my jurisdiction without somebody like Dobler who knew exactly about the technology, let me please emphasize that at this point, I'm not anywhere in this picture. We had made it so that Aleppo Township staff could easily provide this service on their own. And the model that we created could be followed by any jurisdiction, regardless of their size or resources. Okay, so that's where Aleppo Township was as of about February of 2020. And then the dome fell. Township buildings were closed. Municipal meetings couldn't be held in person. And everybody started to panic to figure out how we were going to continue to provide local government services under these circumstances. Now, at this point in the story, Aleppo Township didn't do anything different than what I expect most of you did. Like everybody else, they took to Zoom. The commissioners met online and they could watch from home. Perhaps the one thing that Aleppo Township did do different than I imagine most other municipalities is that they continued posting a recording of their remote meetings online. So if a resident couldn't see the live stream in real time, they could still go back later and watch it at a time of their choosing. And again, the recordings of these remote meetings were indexed and searchable so that they could watch in their real time whenever they wanted to, just the parts that they wanted. Now, at this point, I want to encourage everybody who's watching to ask yourself 3 questions. First, how many of you held at least one meeting via Zoom or some other similar service during the pandemic? 2, how many of you enjoyed the process of having meetings via Zoom? And 3, how many of you would prefer your meetings take place via Zoom rather than in person? Now, please make sure you understand something here. I am not suggesting that you or any other municipality plan to replace your in-person meetings with Zoom meetings right now. I believe strongly that there is magic in meetings and that having everybody assembled in the same room provides benefits that we cannot appreciate, measure, or articulate, especially in the setting of local government that presumably does not involve extended travel for anybody to appear. I am of the opinion that doing away with in-person meetings in the name of progress would be throwing away the baby with the bathwater. But that also doesn't mean that the goal should be to run back to your in-person meetings without regard to the technological advancements that we made during the pandemic. Let me try to reconcile the difference between these 2 suggestions with a story. The story I'm going to tell you took place at the height of the pandemic. This was May of last year, and the municipality involved here was the borough of Sewickley, which is the next town over from Aleppo. Now, in the spirit of full disclosure, at the time of these events, I was neither a resident of Sewickley, nor was I a resident of Aleppo. And as you'll hear, this has a little bit of a political bent, and I am neither a registered Republican, nor am I a registered Democrat. I'm a registered independent. So I really didn't and don't have a standing to take a position one way or the other on this dispute. But that didn't stop me from watching it unfold. So here's what happened. The president of Sewickley's Borough Council was running for higher office. He was seeking a position on the state Senate, and we were just about to get into the May primary. At the same time, there was a rally in downtown Pittsburgh to end the stay-at-home orders. And as a candidate for state Senate, the president of Sewickley's Borough Council went to the downtown protest. And while he was there, he posed for this picture with a group of armed militia members. There was some suggestion, disputed though it may have been, that some members of this group wore a patch that is sometimes associated with white supremacists. This picture got out and everybody was upset. Democrats were steamed because they thought cavorting with armed militia members was a look unfitting the president of Sewickley's Borough Council. Republicans were keyed up because they saw a flaw they thought they could exploit against the candidate in the upcoming primary. The point was, the whole town was angry. So they did what every municipality has done in America for the last 250 years when there's an issue that's got the whole town upset. They scheduled a special meeting to vote on recalling the borough president. Only they couldn't have this special meeting in person because of the pandemic. So they scheduled the special meeting to take place via Zoom. It took place on a Friday evening, and I've got to tell you, from my perspective, it was the cultural event in Sewickley that weekend. Folks were talking about it the whole time. Over 400 audience members joined, and dozens of folks spoke on both sides of the issue. The meeting lasted for over 3.5 hours. And by the end, I think everybody felt as if the issue had been thoroughly debated. In the end, the Borough Council president survived the recall vote, but he ultimately lost to other Republican challengers in the primary. But the outcome isn't really the point. What's important is the experience. The borough of Sewickley was incorporated in 1853. It is hard to believe that in the 168-year history, they ever had 400 people attending one of their meetings in person. The Sewickley Borough Building, where in-person meetings take place, certainly can't house 400 visitors. So even if this could be accomplished, it would require selection of an off-site location. Moreover, live streamed meetings, people can participate in local government while they do other things. Our family listened to the meeting while we ate dinner and cleaned up the dishes. I heard other folks saying that they played it through the speakers in their car and they listened to it while they drove their kids around to other activities. And still others told me that they had it on in their headphones and they listened to it while they walked their dog. The point is that residents shouldn't have to be present in the building to participate in their government. Streaming makes it so that more people can participate. Period. There is no arguing with that fact. So if your goal is to maximize the number of people who are involved in their representational democracy, which, in my opinion, should be the goal, there is no question that streaming is part of the solution. Furthermore, let's talk about the citizens who chose to speak at that meeting. I mean, it's one thing to give people the chance to listen in on a municipal meeting while they're doing their dishes. It's a whole different kettle of fish to allow residents to comment remotely. That is no trivial accomplishment. That is what I would characterize as advanced democracy. And that is worth investigating. And at least you start telling yourselves that this was a bad idea because of fears that residents would behave badly. Let me introduce you to the mute button. Recognizing that the meeting would be long and heated, Sewickley's elected officials made a choice that had fascinating implications. They started the meeting with a warning. "We expect you to be civil," they said. "If you go over your allotted time or you use profanity, you will be given one warning. If you continue to speak in an inappropriate manner, we will mute you." And you know what the amazing effect of this warning was? They didn't have to mute anybody, not even once. All these speakers, 4 hours of meetings, and nobody got muted. To the contrary, everybody who spoke behaved in a responsible manner. Why? Because simply having that kind of control forces people to behave more appropriately. Now, contrast that to in-person meetings. Last month, our local school district had a meeting about masks. Their meeting was hybrid, so people were there in person. And guess what? They had no control over their speakers. People spoke for as long as they wanted, they yelled and they swore. The moderator tried to keep control, but it was a heated conversation, and there's really very little that can be done under those circumstances. They had their police there, but they kept them in the back because they understandably didn't want to look as if they were using force to control what people said. But if those people were online and they knew that they could be muted if they didn't follow the rules, it would have led to a very different outcome. Okay, so obviously, I believe that municipal meetings should be streamed even once COVID-19 is resolved. I think you should have those meetings in person, and I think the expectation should be for your board members to attend in person. But I think your residents should be able to consume those meetings remotely. That's part one. Part two is that I think you should record those meetings and post a recording online. Now, before I get into the theoretical part of the recording, let me just address a minor technical issue. I'm talking about streaming and recording as if they're two totally different operations. The reality, though, is that if you're already using YouTube for your streaming operation, which is what I entirely recommend, posting a recording of the meeting when it's finished is as simple as checking a box when you start the meeting. This will make it so that the recording is immediately available for on-demand viewing. So even if a resident tunes in 10 minutes late, he or she can start at the beginning of the meeting and either catch up or be 10 minutes behind the whole time. If any of you had kids in remote school, it's what we learned to call asynchronous meetings. Obviously, that viewer wouldn't be able to use the chat feature and certainly wouldn't be able to participate in public comment, but they could start at the beginning even if they were late. Okay, so why do I think it's so important for recordings of meetings to be posted online? Well, think about it from the same perspective as the increased public involvement that we talked about earlier when we discussed remote participation. Only this time, you're not shifting the place where the meetings will occur, you're shifting the time. It's crazy to me that we punish residents who are not available at the exact time we are having meetings. There are 730 hours in a month, but under the traditional model of in-person local government, only one of those 730 hours is earmarked for municipal meetings. And I get it, it's 2 or 3 if you have long meetings or if you meet more than once per month, but you get the point. The ratio of available hours for municipal meetings and unavailable hours is very lopsided. If the time a resident has available for local government doesn't overlap with the meeting schedule, that resident is out of luck and there is nothing he or she can do to catch up. Now, that approach worked in the past. We just said, well, this is the time of the meeting, and if it's important to you, you will reorganize your schedule to be here. But that worked because it had to. We didn't have any other options, and we do now. We don't have to adopt this take it or leave it attitude. And I'll take it a step farther and say that if we continue to govern with this mindset, we'll be jammed up faster than you can say Jack Robinson. Now, let me show you the YouTube page for Aleppo Township. And look at this. I mean, the first one here is only 2 weeks old, and it's got 16 views. But look at the others here. 70 views. We got one down here that's got 106 views, 138 views. Out of curiosity, I charted the data from Aleppo Township's YouTube channel over the last 12 months. And you'll see here that it is not uncommon at all for Aleppo Township meetings to get over 100 online views. 138 is their best showing yet. And this blue line right here, this represents the regression line. So when you average out all of this data, you get an average value of 70.25 views. That means that on average, Aleppo Township meetings get 70.25 online views. On average. Are any of you confident enough in your meeting attendance that you would be willing to bet that your municipality averages 70.25 in-person attendees over the last 12 months? And if you're going to say that the last 12 months were unfair because it was COVID, how about over any 12-month period? Do any of you have 70.25 viewers in person over the last 12 months? And even at the low end, Aleppo Township's poorest showing still carried 16 views. I don't know about your meeting room, but I doubt that Aleppo Township has 16 chairs in its meeting room. And think about the implications of that fact. Aleppo wouldn't even be prepared to accommodate as many people in person as view its meetings online on its worst day. Now, I guess all of this assumes that you believe public participation in your meetings is a good thing. And I won't put you on the spot. I won't ask you to raise your hands and tell me how many people agree that public participation in municipal meetings is a good thing. But I know that not all elected officials think that way. After I spoke with you the last time encouraging the streaming and recording of municipal meetings, I actually had a local elected official say that he wouldn't do it in his municipality because the less they know, the better. I actually heard an official say this to me. Obviously, I totally disagree with this statement. Furthermore, though, I want to put this back to you. And I want to ask you to seriously consider this statement. Because if you're sitting there listening to me speak and you're resistant to what I'm saying, I want you to wonder how much of your hesitancy is motivated by some derivation of this statement. Because if you do a fair analysis and you conclude that your hesitancy is based, even in part, around not wanting your constituents to see what's going on in your meetings, I think you really need to reevaluate your role as a public servant. Now, here's the rest of the list. These are all the excuses I've heard from elected officials over the years for why streaming and recording their meetings won't work in their jurisdictions. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I'll tell you why I'm not going to go through all of these. Because if you go to www.matthewdobler.com/meetings, you will find a document that links to a whole bunch of supporting resources. So for example, you can link to a materials list and a document on an instruction guide that will walk you through everything that we did and bought step by step, including part numbers and screenshots. And one of the links in that document is to a list of objections, which also contains my responses. So all of those things I just put up, they're all here, and you can find all of my responses there, and you can pursue that in your own time. And I think that's valuable because if you make the decision that you're going to try to take this back to your board, I guarantee you're going to hear one of the objections that's raised here. So you might as well hear what I've thought about it ahead of time. Now, the last thing I want to do is I want to take a look at the text of Act 15. And I want to talk to you about how the legal footing implicates this conversation on a go-forward basis. And I want to start with an understanding of what exactly Act 15 is so that we can talk about how the legal footing decides what we're going to do while we go forward. So Act 15 of 2020 was a law that was signed by Governor Wolf, and it provided measures for the continuing function of local government businesses and activities. It became effective on April 20th of 2020 at the height of the pandemic. And among other things, Act 15 eliminated the requirement for the physical attendance at public meetings by permitting the use of an authorized telecommunication device. It told certain deadlines, and it provided for the remote use of notaries. Now, we're going to talk in just a second about what a permitted authorized telecommunication device was, but hang on to this idea of remote notaries for a second, because I am going to bring that up again in the future. So an authorized telecommunication device was defined as any device which permits, at a minimum, audio communications between individuals. Now, I always think it's funny that we have these very advanced technical sounding terms like authorized telecommunication device. It's the 3-word term with these multi-syllable words, and we think it's going to have some very scientific explanation. And then we get this definition. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, 2 cans tied together with a string would meet this definition of an authorized telecommunication device. But whatever. One critical part of Act 15 was that it dispensed with provisions in certain municipal codes, such as the Borough Code, which required the physical presence at a meeting location of a quorum of the authorized members, so long as the quorum was otherwise established through the authorized telecommunication device. So in other words, they didn't have to have all people in person to meet their quorum. Now, this was all well and good during the thickest parts of the pandemic. Act 15 was the procedural tool that allowed us to hold meetings remotely. And like everything else that we did via Zoom during the pandemic, it served us well. The problem is that provisions of the law expired on June 24th, 2021, when the State General Assembly ended Governor Wolf's emergency disaster declaration. So without Act 15, we are back to the first and second class township codes and the Sunshine Act as the governing documents. The Pennsylvania State Association of Township Supervisors has given its members the following advice. It says, township officials should keep in mind that Act 15 of 2020 allowed all local government types to conduct fully virtual or teleconference meetings while the governor's emergency disaster declaration was in effect. Since the disaster declaration was terminated with the passage of H.R. 106, townships of the second class, and I would add that also includes of the first class, may go back to pre-declaration conditions and conduct in-person or hybrid meetings. Hybrid meetings must have a physical meeting location where the public may attend in person, as well as a virtual option, and supervisors, and I would add that also includes commissioners, may participate in person or virtually. While some other local government codes have specific requirements for an in-person quorum, the second-class township code does not have any such provisions. The Sunshine Law does require a physical meeting location for the public to participate. So, as the law stands right now, you are required to have meetings at a physical location, and the public is required to be able to attend that meeting. What that means is that 100% Zoom meetings are no longer permitted. You are certainly permitted to stream the meeting, but it's not allowed to exist only via streaming. So what's the problem with that? I told you earlier that I supported basically this exact same model. Why do we need to monkey with this at all? Aren't we happy with a long-term solution that requires meetings to take place at a physical location, but allows the press and the public to attend virtually? Well, here's the question. How many of you have returned to in-person meetings? And I guess at this point, the answer should be all of you, because again, you're not supposed to be meeting in 100% virtually anymore. So if 100% of you have returned to in-person meetings, how many of you still provide a mechanism for residents to participate remotely? Because herein lies the rub. Under the framework that we're currently living with, which is the exact same law we've always lived with, municipalities have the option, but not the requirement, to provide a streaming choice. And unfortunately, what we're learning as a society is that hybrid options are notoriously difficult to implement. It's one thing to be entirely in person. It's one thing to be entirely on Zoom. Those models have already been built and we know how they work. But having some people be in person and some people be online, that's a model that we haven't worked out yet. So when municipalities get to pick what they're going to do, the vast majority will take the option that is cheaper and easier. And the cheaper and easier option is 100% in person with no potential for synchronous remote participation. The cheaper and easier option will take those benefits that we discussed earlier and flush them down the toilet. And here's another problem. It doesn't matter if we're talking about municipal meetings or court or office jobs. The undeniable fact is that over the next 50 years, many of these activities will transition to an online version of their former selves. I just don't believe that in 2071, Americans will still be expected to be present at a physical building at 7:00 p.m. on a Monday or whenever you hold your meetings to participate in their local government. In one form or another, this democratic process will migrate to some form of a remote proceeding. But if we're not playing around with those possibilities now, then we will again be taken off guard by whatever catalyst forces us to implement these technologies in the future. Think about it. How many of you took my 2015 speech to heart and went back to your boards and implemented a remote participation option? I mean, 0 of you wrote to me and told me that you did, so I assume the answer to my question is 0. So if nobody did it in 2015 and everybody's found themselves surprised when COVID-19 forced their hand in 2020, what makes us think that we will do any better with innovation in the future if we are relying on the exact same legal framework? We talk about individual municipalities as the laboratory for democracy. But what good is a laboratory if nobody is running any experiments? So, what do I suggest? Well, I would like to see legislation that formalizes and makes permanent the temporary provisions we saw in Act 15, allowing meetings to take place entirely online. I don't think anybody is prepared to do that now, and I don't even know if municipalities should do that now. But I think our local governments should have the option to do that. I think we should be encouraging that kind of experimentation. Who knows? Maybe a smaller municipality would find significant cost savings if they didn't have to provide a physical location for meetings. The municipality I live in now is the borough of Osborne, and we do not have a physical building. We have our meetings in a mix between the local school and sometimes they're at the local library. You've got to know where they're going to be, and you've got to be there at the right place and the right time. Furthermore, there is precedent to do this. Remember how I told you that one aspect of Act 15 was related to remote notary work? It wasn't an accident that I included that seemingly unrelated detail in a speech about local government. The reason is the provisions of Act 15 relating to remote notary work have been made permanent, even though Act 15 itself has expired. So if some aspects of Act 15 have been made permanent, if anybody really wanted to, the others could as well. But what I would really like to see is more encouragement for local municipalities to supplement their in-person meetings with new and innovative online options to allow residents to participate remotely. Part of what Act 15 did well is that it contained clear and unambiguous language. Local elected officials who were reluctant to Zoom meetings couldn't hide behind legislation that they thought shielded them from participation. Act 15 did a good job about clearly permitting new technologies. I'd really like to see similarly clear language from Harrisburg about what is permitted as far as streaming and recording of meetings. Because I'll tell you, I've researched this law on my own. Obviously, I'm not going to give anybody a legal opinion, but for my own sake, I am convinced that municipalities such as Aleppo have every legal authority that they need to stream, record, and post their meetings online. But just as confident as I am in that position, I also guarantee you that somebody else in this room thinks I don't know what I'm talking about and believes there are prohibitions against this conduct in the Sunshine Act, in the first and second class township codes, or somewhere else in the law. I guarantee you that we will hear incorrect assertions about privacy rights. We'll hear unrelated rules about quorums, and we will be reminded that the law makes the secretary's minutes the official recording of the meeting and not the video. I really wish Harrisburg would just take these arguments off the table and say, in no uncertain terms, that any municipality may stream and record any meeting as a matter of course. But before I sit down, let me make one appeal to your sense of reason. The most important change that we can make is to our own perception of public service. I believe in all of you. I don't know where any of you stand politically, and I am sure that if we got to talking, we would find at least one issue that we disagree on substantively. But I also know that you raise your hand when the community is asking for volunteers, and you do it over and over again every 4 years. I know that you're not doing it because it's a picnic or a day at the beach. I know that you're not doing it because it's going to make you rich. To the contrary, I am positive that every one of you is motivated by a genuine interest in making your neighborhoods a better place. Given that footing, I want to encourage all of you to reassess your feelings about cameras in your meeting rooms. I suspect that many of you who are opposed to this technology formed those opinions years ago when there were better reasons to be distrusting of broadcasting legal proceedings. More importantly, you didn't have the proof points back then about how well it could all operate and how easily it could be integrated into the good work that you are already doing. But the question I want to ask you now is, what is best for your residents? If you were operating a business and your customers were filling out a survey about their experience after every meeting that you had, would they give you good marks? Would they tell you that they enjoyed interacting with you? Because this is the mindset I want to encourage. You are public servants, and your job is to serve the public. You should be looking for ways to make the public feel good about the service you are providing. But here's where I've got good news for you. And I really think I'm sharing something that's a secret. This is easy to do. I know. You don't think you can do it. Trust me, you can do it. But even if you don't actually believe me that you can do it, just pretend for 1 minute as if you can do it. And as you think about it, think how cool it would be in your municipality if you gave your residents this power. They would love you, right? They would think that you were brilliant, right? Ladies and gentlemen, I want to promise you, if you are looking for a way to give something to your residents, there is a lot of bang for your buck from this plan. It is very inexpensive and it is very easy to implement. And the political returns are huge. You'll get tons of good press and your residents will love you. Thank you.